Welcome to Charities at Work. Thank you all for being with us here today. Today's candid conversation, the impact of racism on employee engagement, will start shortly. I just want to do a quick welcome and then I'll turn it over to our panel for today's very important discussion. My name is Heather Lofkin-Wright. I'm with the Responsible Business Leadership team at PwC US. I'm also the chair of this year's Charities at Work Corporate Advisory Council. We are supposed to all be together in New York this week for our 19th annual Charities at Work Summit on Employee Engagement. And instead, of course, we're here on video. We appreciate that there's been a lot of video burnout lately, and we thought this group of candid conversations would be a great way to continue to bring this community together to have important conversations. So I want to start by acknowledging the three nonprofits who do incredible work to bring this community together each year, and that's Community Health Charities, Global Impact, and EarthShare. So thank you so much to all the hard work that these teams have done over the last 19 years, as well as especially these past few months, to do a quick pivot on how we would deliver these important conversations. So far we've had conversations around COVID-19, of course, the effect on volunteerism, moving to virtual volunteerism, and diversity and inclusion. And many of you may know that inclusion was meant to be the theme of our summit this week. It's of course never been more important than it is today. And in fact, as we look at this new normal and how we're talking about things, it turns out that inclusion, as we've all seen the past few weeks, is not really putting the fine enough point on it. And so I really give credit to my colleagues here on the Corporate Advisory Council of being really explicit in today's conversation being around the impact of racism on employee engagement. We're really committed to continuing to have this conversation with all of you. We hope that you'll be a part of the dialogue today and utilize the Q&A function. I just want to share a personal note before we move on to the topic. On this topic of diversity and inclusion not really putting a fine enough point on it, and this being a new normal. We had a conversation at PwC a couple of weeks ago now where our US chairman outlined what PwC is doing to address racism in the US. And the thing he said that really gave me the chills was when he said, if you're not comfortable with this approach, I might ask you to ask yourself if PwC is the right place for you. I'm paraphrasing and not a direct quote. But it was very clear to me that he was making this point that so many of us are seeing now, that it's not enough to not be racist. You have to actively be anti-racist. And today's panel is ready to talk about that with us today. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Kevin Clayton, who's going to facilitate today's call. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Heather. We're going to take a moment to just look at a few slides before we get started. So I'm sure many of you, as you saw the slides, you saw a dramatic change from the peaceful protests, the violence, and then we started showing slides in the workplace. And I just wanted to begin our conversation around that because I had opportunity in Cleveland to attend two different protests, and some of those pictures were from the first one that I actually attended. So I was right there front and center. And I also realized that I was looking around at the different people that were protesting. There were also colleagues of mine, people that I do business with. So the translation from what the protests were symbolizing on the street actually was transferred back into the workplace and with the workforce. So the reality that they're two separate conversations is really a myth. Thus, the title of our conversation today, The Impact of Racism on Employee Engagement, because we're all feeling this and we all, from a workplace standpoint, bring our whole selves into the workplace. So how is the impact of racism affecting what we do? This is a very important conversation that we need to have, and right now could not be a better time. This is important for HR professionals. It's important for our CSR professionals, our D&I professionals, people that actually are responsible for motivating and encouraging and engaging employees. This is the time in which we need to have the conversation. So I would encourage you to ask your questions. You have a panel that I'm going to introduce in a moment that is well qualified to offer perspectives and answers from many different viewpoints. But first, we want to hear from you. And we have an opportunity for you to participate in a one-question poll. And I think the answers are going to be very interesting relative to what's going on in your workplace. So the question is, how is your organization taking steps to make systemic change to address racism within your organization? Okay, wow, very interesting. We could actually have a complete session discussing these answers. And we'll make sure that our panelists have an opportunity to weigh in and comment as well. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. And wow, my esteemed colleagues that I have an opportunity to now share this particular platform with. We have Patricia Harris from Best Buy, Jerome Tennell from Marriott International, and Gary Levante from Berkshire Bank. So I'm going to ask each one of them now, and starting with you, Patricia, can you please just give a little bit of background so our audience knows exactly who they're speaking to this afternoon?
Absolutely. Want to say thank you to Charities at Work, also for having this important conversation and allowing me to share in this moment. I've been with Best Buy for 13 years, and I've worked 7 years in our social impact team. During my time with the team, I've led our signature employee engagement programs, which include E-Squad Academy and our Best Buy Teen Tech Centers. I currently lead our national footprint in grant making, which will provide $3 million in 2020 to local nonprofits across the country. Also, I work on strategic initiatives for our team, so kind of start up and thinking about, what's the next evolution of our work. So when I think about how I'm dealing with everything in this moment, in our family, we've participated in protests, we've continued to educate ourselves on the facts of the movement, donated resources to various causes, but it's so important. Things are so super heavy right now that we try to find joy. So we've been finding joy where we can, and that means, spending time with family. Just this past weekend was a great opportunity for us. We celebrated Juneteenth in a big way in our family for the first time. It was also Father's Day. We've really been super intentional about taking in so much information that one day me and my husband were just like, you know what? Tonight, we're not gonna be woke. We're just not gonna do it. And we just watched Shaft, because he's a bad mother. Shut your mouth. So it's super important as we move into continue to press hard on this issue, that we're also finding joy and we're practicing self-care. And if that means you got to veg out on some Shaft, I'll give you a recommendation, but do what you have to do to take care of yourself. Thank you.
All right, Patricia, I appreciate that. I thought we were going to have to go X version here or our version. I didn't know what was about to happen. So
all right.
Thank you. All right. Hey, Jerome, why don't we hear from you next?
Well, first, I just want to thank you guys for having me on this panel today. This is a topic that is incredibly close to my heart. You guys can see my title. It's, Manager of Volunteerism at Marriott International. But even though I have, about 6 years in the social good space, and I'm also a military veteran, what I want to share is something a little bit more personal. And that's, I do identify as a man of color in the Black community. And my first conversation about racial injustice actually took place when I was 7 years old. I was in second grade, and I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and this was just in 1992 when the LA riots were happening in the wake of the Rodney King beatings and the verdict for the officers, and what we're going through right now. When I'm being asked, well, how am I doing? To Patricia's point, it's incredibly heavy and it's incredibly exhausting because I'm starting to see time and time again very similar actions happening in society. And so, the self-care that Patricia talked about is something that I've had to be incredibly mindful about, and making a deliberate point to detach and to find that joy and that happy space as I sort of deal with this personally, and watch our company sort of navigate these hard times professionally. I think of course, there's a silver lining of this. And I think the silver lining is what we're talking about here today and what we're seeing companies do across the board.
Thanks, Jerome. I appreciate you sharing. Gary, how about you?
Thanks, Kevin. And also just to echo what the other panelists said, a big thanks to Charities at Work for helping organize today's conversation in this moment, in the environment we're in a COVID world, to bring us together, to be open to create this safe space where we as CSR and employee engagement professionals can have these important discussions. I've been in the corporate responsibility space for a little over 10 years now. And never in my career did I think that I would have to deal with some of the moments that have transpired in 2020. And as a straight white male, I can say that I have felt incredibly inadequate in the moment. As an ally to my friends, as an ally to coworkers, and as someone who is, helping to facilitate, some of this work in a business, recognizing the role banks have played historically to perpetuate racist policies and a white supremacy culture. So really have taken a lot of time to do some learning and reflection and really to educate other straight white men on the role of allyship, particularly in this current moment.
Wow, Gary, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So Gary, Jerome, and Patricia, I appreciate you kind of giving us insight as to who you are. So the audience knows I will be wearing two different hats, one as the Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement for the Cleveland Cavaliers, also as the Chair for Community Health Charities. So with that, Patricia, I got to ask you this question, because Best Buy is located and headquartered in Minneapolis. You're at the epicenter of what I would call, quite honestly, as great a tragedy as it was with what happened to George Floyd. It was kind of the teaspoon of water that broke the dam, because there had always been all these things happening over a period of time. This time it broke the dam. So with you being right there at the epicenter in Minneapolis, how has this particular moment impacted Best Buy's ability to engage with employees?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Kevin. It was a wake-up call. I mean, the murder of George Floyd and just this greater awareness of police brutality and racial inequity has been a wake-up call. I think for obviously what we've seen thereafter, we're pushing a month thereafter, people are still protesting. It's a wake-up call, and our employees saw that very, firsthand in the moment. I mean, we have people that live around the corner from where this incident happened. They live in that community. This is their community. They live across the street from, where the Target went up, where the Target was looted and burned down, or where the police station was, set aflame, and where just everything had happened. I think because it was so close to them, you can step out your door, you're hearing helicopters, and, you're hearing, loudspeakers, and there's just so much unrest. There was a wake-up call from nearly every background, and for the first time in a very long time, we saw very proactive engagement. People were reaching out to us to say, I'm scared as hell, but I want to do something. What can I do, right? So it's really, really fueled our employee engagement. Our white colleagues, our female colleagues, everybody's coming out to be an ally, wanting to make a change within themselves, within their families. They're bringing their families out to do cleanup. They're supporting nonprofits in the area, and they want to work towards long-term change. Kind of what, like Gary said, it's like, I want to educate myself to become an ally, and then I want to change or share my perspective with those in my network who may not think the way I think. So we've seen a lot of that. Our employees feel more empowered to be out in the community, both independently and then with our volunteer opportunities that we share internally, and what that looks like for us, it could be protesting independently, it could be community cleanup, the virtual opportunities that we've had, essential food and supply donations that were taking place in the areas that no longer had functional grocery stores or didn't have functional pharmacies, donating to those, as well as staying to help with the distribution. And we're also advocating partnerships with smaller nonprofits, right? To talk about, the aftermath. I mean, that Lake Street, the kind of real epicenter was Lake Street, and it's going to take a long time to build that back up. But it wasn't just larger institutions like you see with maybe a YWCA or Boys and Girls Club or United Way. These were smaller nonprofits too that don't have the same operating budget. So our team is working to advocate for partnership. So we're not leaving the smaller nonprofit out, or we're thinking about who is it that we really want to support, and how do we do that? We also talk about creating a long-term plan for restoration and then equity for our volunteer efforts. Some people have, a big structure in place where they can actively, put out ads to say, come and volunteer with us. But there are some organizations that don't. How do we make sure that we're being equitable in those spaces?
Patricia, it sounds like in a crazy kind of way, this is united the community and united your employees. Is that fair?
Absolutely. For the first time in literally forever, I've been here 13 years. I mean, we had in our social channels, people reaching out just to say, hey, I don't know what to say. You don't have to respond. I just want you to know that I'm thinking about it. I mean, we have leaders from our ERGs, our executive sponsors reaching out to the group saying just that, like, I don't know what to say, y'all, but if you teach me, if you know what I'm saying, help me learn and I'll learn and I'll be your ally. So definitely a unity that we've just not seen before, even in the midst of turmoil, right? Even in the midst of peaceful protesting turning into something violent to distract us from the issue. We really have some employees on our team or just in the organization overall who realize, like, let's not get distracted from the real issue here. It's an enormous sense of community up there, and it's like we gotta do better. And I do believe that they're on the right track to do better long term.
So what was meant for bad turned into good.
Yes.
Okay, so Jerome, I'm coming to you next, but I want to frame this because we were talking about George Floyd as the happening in Minneapolis and the epicenter. But before that, Breonna Taylor. Before that, Ahmaud Arbery. Then since then, Rayshard Brooks. So you not being in Minneapolis, however, now having a more kind of global perspective of all the things that are going on from across the country, how is your organization responding from a employee engagement perspective?
It's been tough, and it's been tough because, candidly, we're also dealing with one of the worst economic crises for our company, our industry. And 2 months ago, we went through the process of furloughing and laying off tens of thousands of associates across the globe, and the United States being the heaviest hit. So when I say it's been tough, we're dealing with two different things, right? A lot of our associates are fighting for their jobs, and at the same time, we have racial injustice and civil discord, which is really just compounding on a situation where we're just trying to keep people joyful and positive in such what can be a very negative time. And so from a very informal perspective, we actually, there is a non-sanctioned Marriott Survived group that exists on Facebook. And there are tens of thousands of associates who are in this Facebook group. And I think one of the most important things that I've seen is that people are really rallying at a grassroots level to share positivity amongst the associate base. And a lot of these folks are property-based associates. But then in addition to that, as we're navigating this economic crisis as a company, we're going through the process of creating the safe space and the dialogue. I think, when we think about our presence here in the United States, to put in perspective, we're in 131 countries and territories, 7,300 hotel properties, and about 5,500 of them are here in the United States. And, we're now going through the process of creating very deliberate town hall conversations where we will have a safe space to talk and to hear feedback and then to act on that feedback. But again, it's been tough trying to break through the noise of everybody's personal, economic, and financial situation as we go through this.
So Jerome, you talked about the conversations and the balance between individuals thinking about their own personal situations, but yet still having these tragedies kind of overshadowing them. And then you talked about the fact that about 2,000 of your properties are outside the US, and we're seeing on the news how other countries are reacting. How are you engaging your employees, or how are your employees responding that are outside the US, but yet maybe in some of those cities where protests are happening as well?
You know, unfortunately, I don't have a good handle on the atmospherics. I think, and a part of this is trying to break through, you know, the noise of the financial impact of COVID-19. You know, with so many associates right now furloughed, one of the hardest things to maintain is continuity globally, because we're really just running a skeleton crew. Now, if I were a betting man, I would say that in countries where there are, there's representation of Black communities, whether they are Caribbean descent or whether they come from Africa or elsewhere, Brazil and other countries, I suspect that they are navigating this in a very similar, albeit a local level, very similar to how we're having to navigate that here in the United States.
Okay, thank you. So Gary, we heard from Best Buy. We've heard from the hospitality industry with Marriott. You working for Berkshire Bank. Can you talk to us about how all of these tragic killings and how this moment is affecting your industry, and how are you engaging employees?
And I think other panelists said it. I mean, this is really an inflection point, and the names that we've mentioned, George Floyd and so many others, those are only the names that we know. And there's hundreds of thousands of people throughout the 400-year plus history of the US of names that we don't know. And banks in particular have a history of perpetuating racist policies, sometimes intentional and sometimes unintentional. So at Berkshire, we really took a moment to reflect on that history. And this is work that we have been doing for at least the last year and a half, if not longer. But really leaning into that to do more education within our employees, to acknowledge the role we play, but also to create the space to let Black and brown voices be heard, so that folks weren't hearing my voice or our CEO's voice, but we're hearing the voices of those that have been impacted, those that have fought this fight for a number of years. One of the first things that we did after the murder of George Floyd is we had employees, in our employee resource groups reaching out to us. And we hosted a company-wide, video town hall with our CEO, with our chief experience officer, with some of our consultants, and just had a conversation about the moment, but about the moment within the context of everything else happening in the world and in history. We had about 65% of our employees join that conversation, which really, kickstarted that work. And we've done, internal statements, external statements, which I do think are important, but we've really focused on moving beyond rhetoric to actions, and how are we going to use this moment to really transform, and lean into some of the work that we're doing as a company to ensure that everyone can bank with dignity, to ensure we have products and services that are available to everyone, to ensure that our workplace culture is a culture where everyone belongs and everyone feels safe. Just last Friday, we actually hosted a conversation and training for our people managers, because many of our people managers look like me. They are, straight white males or females, and maybe managing, one or two Black individuals on their team. And they are so uncomfortable with even acknowledging it that we felt we needed to be equipping them with the tools and resources they need to have those conversations and to get more comfortable being uncomfortable.
Okay, Gary, thank you. So a number of different things in which each one of your organizations are doing to engage employees. And that's just kind of in the response to kind of the moment that was the tipping point with George Floyd's murder. And I just know for myself with the Cavaliers and the NBA, the kind of things that we were doing were very similar, the courageous conversations and a lot of the activities. But one of the things that we did was we called it for what it was, and that was, it was a racist act by a law enforcement officer. And you all have seen this all across the country around, now we hear the term systemic racism. And that is really a catch-all that is still racism, but from a systemic standpoint, we're talking about the healthcare system, the financial system, the housing systems, all of these systems, including law enforcement. So my question, and I'm coming to you now, Patricia, around calling it out for what it is, which is the title of our discussion of racism in the workplace. How are you engaging your team members and your employees around calling it out for what it is, racism in the workplace?
I was muted there, my bad. We've had some conversations. What wouldn't surprise me is the candid conversations are likely happening across a lot of organizations. We've done it across the organization to allow people to learn from others, hear their stories, learn how, yep, this is racism. Do not be conflicted about it. And then also making a point to call out, what Black Lives Matter mean. This does not mean, we don't think anybody else's life matters. What we're saying is Black people are disproportionately treated differently and killed, right? And all of these other things and being marginalized at a greater rate than anybody else. So it's really about bringing awareness to what we really mean and what we stand for. So we've seen, letters from the CEO to our customer base, as well as to our employee base. Our internal chat rooms, I kind of alluded to that earlier, where, people are sharing resources on, how to cope. We've, our employee assistance program, we made sure that employees knew, like, this is a triggering experience. We have people you can talk to about this and someone you can sit with to help you process what you're feeling. We've been intentional within our social impact team. I think we spent 2-3 weeks straight. We just dished all the agenda items and we talked about this thing and we talked about how we made it better. And because we were in the Twin Cities, we heard from stories of our peers that, last night I just went out and started, picking up debris and collecting trash, and how they're really going out to be in the community. But we also allowed our people of color on the team to share in a safe space, like how extremely exhausted we are. For some of our team members, they hadn't slept in 8 days, right? Because of just this mounting pressure and weight on them has affected their life so much. So we've allowed employees to share how they feel in a safe space, and then be super intentional about, okay, what's going to be our next path forward? It's not, yes, we do want to allow people to have their voices heard, but we need to make a plan of action going forward.
Yep. So Patricia, I'm going to just ask a follow-up to that, because a number of our members of the audience who are watching in on this are with companies that aren't as open in calling it out for what it is. So my question to you is, as you were having these courageous conversations, calling racism out for what it was, how was that tension in the organization at Best Buy?
Yeah, there was tension. There was tension, and of course, there's it's uncomfortable. If you think it's uncomfortable hearing about it, try living it, right? So the tension was there, but we had both allies and Black people alike kind of stopping the foolishness in its tracks. When people tried to derail us about something that happened in a nursing home in Seattle, don't deflect. Get back to, here's what we're talking about in this moment, and here are the facts to back it up. And here's how we got to where we are today. So we do a good job of kind of self-policing, especially in this area. And what also felt a little bit more easy to do it is that we had a company who came out and make a stand. I think for a very long time, we would have been scared, right? To say anything, because who wants to ruffle any feathers? But now that our company is saying this is not okay and we're going to do something about it, we all feel empowered in a way that embodies our values as an organization to say, don't derail from the facts. Here's what it is.
Okay, thank you. Jerome, Same question. As you all, is at Marriott calling out racism? And again, I understand that delicate balance with what's going on with COVID and now racism, another virus, if you will. How are you all dealing with actually calling it out for what it is?
Yeah, so I think it was about 2 weeks ago that our Chief Executive Officer, Arnie Sorensen, he posted on his personal blog post and really just reaffirmed the company and his personal commitment to a more diverse and inclusive workforce. But I think for me personally, the turning point was a week ago when our company actually came out publicly and said that we are in a fight against racism, called it out, pointed its racism, and then also acknowledged Black Lives Matter. Period. We believe Black Lives Matter. And I think all the tangible actions are incredibly important, but so are the words and how we define and how we universally understand things. And that to me, it just reaffirmed my pride for my company because that meant a lot to me as a person. And I've seen that the company is going through two different shifts right now, right? There's the economic shift of now having to sort of right size under, lesser than average, economic times. But then I think the other part of that too is over the last couple of years, I've also seen that the company is going through a culture shift. The company's been around for over 90 years. And we almost have two very distinct workforces that exist. And, younger generations, more diverse generations are coming into the company. And we're starting to see sort of a change of culture and how I think we talk about things and address and understand things. So things have been positive in that regard, that the language is changing and the language that I've seen is very pointed and in a sense, like in my mind for our company, that was a very bold statement because of our more conservative, traditional corporate culture.
Thank you. Gary, same question to you.
Yeah,
How does your organization handle calling out racism?
Mm-hmm. And I think building off, what Jerome said, because as a bank, as a financial institution, we traditionally as an industry are not very progressive and are very conservative, are not very diverse in every sense of that word. So having these types of conversations in business is incredibly challenging. In banking, you have those additional layers in longstanding history of cultural norms that are just not aligned with the expectations of stakeholders in the 21st century. We're fortunate where we have an incredible CEO that has really spearheaded this work since taking over as CEO in 2018, and also an incredibly talented chief experience officer who comes from the community organizing space and was a diversity, equity, and belonging expert that kind of have helped us build some of the work that we're building here at Berkshire. And as we think about how we're navigating that moment, creating those spaces for employees to come together and to have these transparent, conversations, I think of the cultural context that it's within, not just in the moment, but for us as a company and how we are uniting together and growing through this challenge to create a company that's even more robust, that's even more diverse, even more welcoming than what existed. And having seen that transformation over the last year, that transformation was really accelerated with the events, of the last month. I think for the first time, it was kind of that aha moment where employees that may not have got it, something finally clicked, whether it was seeing the video of George Floyd, something clicked. And that has helped us have additional conversations internally with folks that, may not have been, openly racist, or folks that may not have, bought into this culture journey and shift we've been on, but they get it now. They saw it. And we're using that to kind of accelerate the transitions that we're already making and to make sure that we're creating those spaces for our employees to feel welcome and to feel like they belong.
Yeah, so thank you, Gary. I'll just add a perspective from the seat that I sit in with the NBA. And we're a very progressive, outspoken league and corporation in general. However, this was really the first time that we also called it for what it was. And we are not ashamed of it. We are intentional of it. You've seen perhaps on CNN and some other places where you've actually seen players and teams wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts and eradicate racism. So for us, we built on top of our current D&I plan, our strategy is to eradicate racism. It is written, it is in play, and it goes across everything that we do. Because just like all three of you, this is the time for us to take a bold stand. And if not now, then when? And I really love what Heather's CEO said. If you can't buy into strategically where we're going to eradicate racism, this is not the organization for you. So Gary, you mentioned ahas, and I want to tee that up as a learning moment for the three of you. And actually, let me start with Gary, and then I'm gonna go to Patricia. What have been some of the ahas? Maybe one aha that you can share about the learning through this process that you now will incorporate in how you handle and manage employee engagement.
Well, I'm actually going to use a personal story from the business, but one I think resonated with me as as a straight white guy. We had a safe space conversation where we had some of our Black employees just sharing, how they felt in the current moment. And although I thought I got it as an ally, and I always thought I was a good ally, I know for me, something clicked when I heard, one of my colleagues talk about how her little 2-year-old baby son, she feared for his life, and she feared for what world he was going to grow up in. And it's actually one of the first times in my career that I ever cried and got teary-eyed in a meeting. And actually that has started a habit of me getting teary-eyed in meetings where we're having these conversations, where we're being authentic, because I think it's like you think you get it, but you don't. As a white ally, you think you do. And I think that was an aha moment for me. I know at least, other folks that were on that call, it was an aha moment for them. And the power of that space, if you can create it at your companies and do so safely, and do so in a way that gets dialogue going. I think I saw in the subsequent conversations, a lot of light bulbs going off in a lot of people, some that got it, some that didn't get it until that moment when they saw their colleagues, crying about something so simple, and the privilege that we experience that others don't. People, I think finally it clicked.
Thank you. Patricia? You have an aha moment out of the learning that you're now going to make sure gets baked into the culture of employee engagement?
Yeah, so what we have learned is, some of the barriers to volunteerism is bias, right? And typically the areas that we serve are people of color, right? And I think we know from, current events that people of color are portrayed, in a different way, and it's typically a negative way. So our philanthropic mission is building brighter futures through technology for teens. And we've identified the need for educating our volunteers. For example, Minnesota has the largest Somalian population in the country, in all of the US, right? So what does that mean to go into their neighborhood? And maybe you're not Muslim, you're definitely not Somalian, right? Because you are, a citizen of the United States. But, what if you aren't Muslim, you're a Christian? So the team is creating a one-pager on how to volunteer with diverse backgrounds, especially when you may not look like the people that you're going to be serving, to help employees who don't look like them or engage regularly be more conscious about their interaction. Learn about the community before they get there is extremely important. Understand whatever trauma that community has been through or maybe going through, understand the trauma that the youth may experience. So like maybe it's an abandonment issue from a parent. So it's super important when we think about volunteerism and long-term mentorship and engagement. Don't let it be a one-time effort because it's superficial, and our young people deserve better than that. And they may already be dealing with abandonment. So we don't need an employee coming in and adding more to that, right? We want them to stay committed. to whatever you say that you're going to do as it relates to engaging with our young people. And I mean, and it's even simple things like don't wear your corporate badge, right? Because they feel like you're coming in there and you're looking at them like a fishbowl, and they're not going to want to engage with you. But if you come in there, you know, strip all the logos and, you know, layers off, just come in there, be personal as a real person, and be with that young person and learn about that young person, you're much likely to build a relationship. So we are building, you know, a toolkit or a one pager just to give pro tips before you, you know, go out and engage in certain communities.
Thank you. Jerome?
I think, you know, for me, the aha moment is that I'm still learning and still figuring things out. And I say that because, you know, I've only lived one life, and my life has only been my experience. And so even in having dialogue with others, like I'm finding that I'm still learning a lot. My family members have experienced very different things than I have. I have friends and colleagues that have experienced things much more negative than I have. And so for me, it's a matter of just continually staying curious and really understanding that I don't have the answers. And even at the points where I don't have the answer and I don't know what to do, acknowledging that's when all the real work begins. And being inquisitive enough and having the fortitude to really find that information and to not stop learning about it.
Thanks, Jerome. I want to share two just very quick aha moments from my seat. And then I see we do have a handful of questions that I want to be able to get to. So the first was, we did the same thing that we're talking about with these courageous conversations. And, you know, we had our African-American team members sharing with our white team members. And one of our shining stars, like one of our high potential, one of our best performers, and he's African-American, and he's telling his story around the fact that he lives in downtown Cleveland, and every place he goes, he always puts on Cavs gear. So he said, most people think it's because I'm trying to be cool. And he shared with his colleagues, it was like, no, I wear Cavs gear to protect myself in case police come and harass me in some sort of way. They first see Cavaliers, then they see me as a Black man. So the aha moment for our organization, this group that we were speaking with, they were just like, wow, I've known you for all this time, years. And I guess I really didn't know you. So our aha moment was that we really didn't know each other. We thought we did, but we didn't. The second actually happened last weekend, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who happens to be a police chief for one of the neighboring communities here. And she actually referenced the fact that her story, and she said, Kevin, I'm Black and blue. And therefore, what I realized, and I want to share this for all of you, because it was a humbling moment for me as a leader of our organization responsible for employee engagement. It was humbling because at that point, I realized that I had not reached out to families or team members that actually had family members that were in law enforcement. And we had another team member say the reason they haven't said anything is because the conversation was focused so much on just kind of the racism part. They said, I fear for my family's life, I fear for my dad, I fear for my brother. And we hadn't given them the support to voice their opinion about how they felt by being part of a law enforcement family. So that was just an aha that I wanted to share, that there's two sides to the coin. I'm not saying that I support either one as it relates to where do we put resources one way or the other, but I'm just saying as leaders of organizations that there are others that are affected by what's going on, and we want to make sure we have an opportunity to give them voice as well. So I see we have some questions. Heather, do you want to share with us what we have?
Yeah, first I just want to say, Kevin, thanks again for bringing up this whole topic. I'm so glad that we had this conversation today. My Twitter is blowing up. These questions are flying in. The panel's been absolutely fantastic. I want to also acknowledge Desiree Mayers, who we have with us from Pfizer. She's one of our colleagues on the Corporate Advisory Council for Charities at Work. And the questions I'm looking at are not directed really at any particular person or organization. So I'll just throw out a couple, and if you all could jump in if you think you have a good answer for these. The first one is, what are you doing to recognize the Black trans lives lost within the past month? Are your LGBTQ plus groups recognizing pride in relation to Black Lives Matter and working with your Black employee networks? This actually speaks somewhat differently, but to that point of intersectionality you were making, Kevin, about this being, there are a lot of things that are of great concern and on people's minds.
Right, and I'll touch upon it briefly because we were just in the process of obviously Pride Month happening in June, and we were formulating our team member resource group around the LGBTQ community. So we're just in the beginning stages of that. So our organization recognized it and partnering with members of the LGBT community as well as different organizations. But specifically to our Black trans, that was not something that we had an opportunity to address yet.
Anyone else? Anyone have
an opportunity?
Yeah, so this is us as a group saying we know we need to do more in this space, and if the person who sent in the question has suggestions, that might be a good point for a future candid conversation as well. Okay, so I have one. Do your companies do mandatory racial justice training? How do you speak to employees that don't seem to get it? If I can add personally onto this one, I find one of the difficult conversations is when you get into the all lives matter point of view, right? And trying to argue this point of why is it so important that we focus on Black Lives Matter?
So I'm happy to kind of take a first shot at the question, and we do have some required diversity and belonging trainings that all of our employees take. One on creating a culture of belonging, one on navigating bias, and one on allyship and the role of allyship to traditionally, under-resourced and marginalized populations. So we do have those required trainings. And, when it comes to the folks that just don't get it, there's some level of education, but then there is the realization that at the end of the day, there are some folks that just are not going to get it. And I think that's when you need to have that deep look inside, as a company, similar to what PwC's chairman did, and say, is this really the place for you? Do your values align with our values as a company? And it's okay if they don't. It just may not be the right place. And I think that's a space that as a business sector, as corporate America, that we're moving closer and closer towards, is this recognition that as, as businesses, we need to stand up for what is in the best interest of all of our stakeholders. And not everyone's going to agree. And what we want to make sure we do is that the folks that agree with us are the vast majority of people.
And I think Gary, oh, sorry, someone was going to add. Is that you, Patricia?
Yeah. Something that, Gary kind of said, like, everybody's not going to get it, and in our organization, we have this term called be human. Even when people don't get it, you have to walk a fine line of inclusion for everybody, because this is still about, we still have to be inclusive of all. We have a responsibility to educate everybody the best we can, but at the end of the day, not everybody's going to get it. But I don't know that we'd be the organization to say, then this isn't the organization for you. Because, we think about being human, and if you're human, you have your, inalienable rights to believe what you believe and practice what you practice. As long as you are not, belittling anybody or harassing anybody, you very well may have a space within this organization. And that's hard to, that could be hard to sit with for some people on both ends.
Yeah, what I think part of that is, Patricia, is letting people be a part of the conversation so they can have their aha moment too, right? Like we would rather people stay in the conversation and do the work. And even if they're not in the same place in terms of embracing social justice and racial justice, as long as they're part of the conversation, we all have a better chance of moving things forward.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's another one. What new policies, procedures have you rolled out as a result of these safe space conversations? What successes, challenges have you found? And I think actually what you were talking about, Patricia, speaks to some of the challenges. Does anyone have anything on the policy or procedure piece, something you're doing differently to facilitate these conversations or set them up for success or get more people involved?
For us, when we think about what's next, by decree of our CEO, she, was transparent, on her and behalf of her senior leadership team. We don't have all the answers. And we're not going to sit back and continue to say we don't know. What she has kind of decreed for us as an organization is putting together a team, a cross-functional team across different backgrounds and different parts of the organization and different seniority levels, to say, if everything was on the table, how can we look at our processes differently? How do we ensure that, what is structural or systemic racism does not exist in our policies? So we're in the very ground stages of that work. So we don't have any challenges or successes yet. They're still kind of developing the framework for, what are going to be our action items, what are going to be our goals, and how do we, recruit the right people.
And I would say, even at Marriott, we're very much in infancy in creating what would be a safe space, or having a round table or town hall discussion about fighting racism, and really using it as also an opportunity to be a sounding board for employees. And so while I don't have any, lessons learned or after action as of yet, one of the things that I'm really curious to see, and you can take this for what it is how our policy and the procedures will allow for failure and will allow for the potential for somebody to say the wrong thing and to be okay doing that, so it becomes a learning or education experience for that person, right? I think one of the things that I've seen is oftentimes things break down and can turn very violent in some instances because there's no dialogue. And so we all have to just be accepting that somebody might say the wrong thing, and we have to be okay. We have to be okay with it, and we have to allow for it so that it becomes a learning opportunity for everybody who's a part of that, including the person who may have misspoke or said the wrong thing. And so I'm actually really looking forward to what these we call them Take Care community talks. What these Take Care community talks will turn into.
Thank you, Jerome. That's fantastic. For the sake of time, I'm not reading all the thank yous, but I want the panel to know that they're getting a lot of love along with the questions here in the Q&A. So here's one. We are considering adding civic engagement as volunteering. Is anyone doing this, and are there considerations to implementing something like this? And I think that can be as tactical as, can you record civic engagement as volunteering time and report that as volunteering time or volunteering events? Or does anyone have another angle on that?
Yeah, so Heather, I'd like to chime in on that. So we have, as our kind of strategic pillars, we have these 4 what we call big rocks. And one of our big rocks is civic engagement. And all along what we have been doing is capturing hours. It is a requirement, and there is a minimum hourly contribution on volunteering. That you have to do that to remain an employee of ours. So the other thing that we were working on, but now has been expedited, and if you think about our organizations, we're all talking about the kind of attitudes that we have that are positive and how we want to reach out and kind of share that with outside our own doors. We believe that in Cleveland, our brand is a leader in the community. And therefore, the Cavalier brand itself, we have an obligation through sports to bring the community along. So what we have done is we've taken an inventory of all the community boards that our team members serve on, and we actually have partnered with an organization that does a matching with other community boards, so that we are now taking the top 25% of our organization, vice presidents, presidents, directors, all the way down, and having it as part of their development that they serve on a board, so that we can have influence from inside of our building outside into these nonprofit communities that are leading our area. So that has been expedited since the George Floyd killing, because we realized that we had to go broader than just inside our own walls.
Thank you, Kevin. I was just trying to see, we have several questions we haven't gotten to. A couple of them are requests actually for Patricia's pro tips one pager. And we also have some questions around how to manage some of these candid conversations and, within organizations, given that we can't sit in one room together right now, as well as what kinds of volunteering we can do when we can't get together in person. I know we only have 3 minutes, so I want to turn things over to Desiree, and I put those outstanding questions out there as something we can consider for future discussions or for people to share offline. Desiree?
Thank you, Heather. And Kevin, thank you, Kevin, and to our panelists, Patricia, Jerome, and Gary, for leading this important conversation today. Thank you all for being a part of the community and continuing to advance this important work. We certainly heard a lot today, and it's allow us to, go back to our respective workplaces and to challenge the status quo. Please note that we will be sharing the recording with you, just in case you've been taking copious notes and missed something. And on a personal level, 2020 for me has been a remarkable year. We've seen coronavirus challenge our health systems, challenge our teaching skills or lack thereof, and so much. And then with this unprecedented movement, we are being challenged to be courageous, to stand tall, and to speak up and let our voices heard. Just quickly, I know we have about a minute and a half, just wanted to share some of the takeaways that I heard today. First one, time to take a bold stand. If not now, when? Being intentional about mental health and calling racism for what it is. Creating a safe space in the dialogue and using the moment to transform business operations. There is just so much that we heard today, and as CSR professionals, we all have a responsibility to shape the conversation in our respective workplaces. I've raised my hand internally to be part of that conversation. Many are still asking, what can I do? You can listen. You can ask questions. You can donate. Let your voice be heard. And one thing that I certainly want to leave with you is a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being part of the conversation. Thank you to Amanda and team for being part of this and for working with us. Continue to lean on each other, continue to be engaged with charities at work. Thank you.